I think we should start. And under extreme conditions, we are holding the second seminar for this term, all in Zoom. As you know, we are all from our homes, and the university is closed. But we are still happy to have with us Ido, who is a pillar in the Minerva Center for already 12 years, the head of research and in charge of the Young Researchers Forum and coordinator of the multiple and cascading extreme conditions. Dr. Ido Rosenzweig has a PhD from the Hebrew University, and we are happy to hear what he has to say about international law today.
Thank you, Ali. I do enjoy the introduction, though I think everyone here um, knows me quite well by now. Um, so let's start. So mm, the paper I want to present here is a variation of a paper I presented a couple of months ago at the Young Researchers Forum. So some of the participants already familiar with it, but also I, I I've made a twist to that presentation, so it won't be just a copy of what you've seen before. And although I wrote that paper originally within the concept of IHL and communication kind of approach of how social media affects um, warfare on the field and international humanitarian law in general, I've reshaped it a little bit, and this is where I want to test that new variation into more of a cascading approach into my theory and the model I want to present. And then I'm going to explain everything, but if I want to jump towards the end and I want to give you some kind of a leading of what kind of discussion and feedback I'm looking for, a part of any questions that you might have on my presentation. It's about how this project actually fits within the cascading world. And and for me, it's actually a point of beginning because I think that the theory I want to present, it can actually be applied to many different aspects. Although I'm going to choose as a case study the notion of international humanitarian law and warfare on the and warfare on the battlefield. Um, okay, so let's start. Let's make sure that everyone can actually see what I want them to see. All right, presentation is on. Um, yeah, it is?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we do.
okay. So the, okay, the modern conflict operates in two simultaneous domains. And the one on the kinetic domain and the one on the digital domain, where the traditional kinetic domain are both in a global battle for public legitimacy and in different areas, including, for example, social media platforms. And my main argument is that the speed that social media operates affects the application of international humanitarian law on the battlefield. And in this presentation, I'm going to explain how and why this is happening and how it actually is a form of cascading extreme condition. Now, the two domains, the kinetic domain and the digital domain, operate in fundamentally different spheres, where military operations are conducted in the physical realm within the framework of international humanitarian law, IHL, and digital narratives moves at viral speed. This creates what I term as race to the viral, a fundamental conflict between narrative speed and legal verification. So the question my paper actually addresses is, what does this asymmetry do to IHL as a manifestation of the rule of law in times of extreme conditions? Now, before I go into the entire theory and approach, I want to show how this works within the world of cascading. So we have the trigger, usually a kinetic event on the battlefield. We have an amplification of that situation, either, and we'll cover the different aspects, whether it's real or fake news, also relevant. But both of them, the kinetic event and the amplification, have an actual impact on how actors on the battlefield behave, and sometimes it actually goes back even before to the kinetic event. But also it affects the rule of law um, after the conflict and questions of impunity and legal paralysis, etc. Yeah. So the digital risk model, the digital risk model deals with this. I propose that model as a theoretical framework designed to analyze institutional resilience under extreme conditions. The DRM, the digital risk model, holds that operational decisions are influenced by reputational consequences and virality potential. In my case, in my specific case study, I'm focusing on international humanitarian law, and I'm saying that the DRM formalizes how digital dynamics place structural pressure on international humanitarian law compliance. It demonstrates that belligerents are now forced to treat reputational risk not as a side consideration, but as an operational imperative that shapes tactical decisions and affect the rule of law. The core insight is somewhat counterintuitive. In the digital battlefield, immediate perception matters more than objective facts. Not because facts don't matter legally, but because perception operates faster than verification. And that speed differential has strategic consequences. All right? Yeah. So the DRM doesn't apply to all conflicts and all situations equally. It requires three specific conditions to work fully. And then if some of them don't work fully, then the level of influence or impact of the DRM will decrease. So the first precondition is high virality potential. We're talking about, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Yeah, I've jumped ahead. Sorry. Before I go into the conceptual framework, I want to explain how my framework of weaponized perception and the DRM is differentiated from existing frameworks. So the first framework is the information warfare. And information warfare is focused on external messaging, using media to control narratives and influence audiences, typically as part of ex-post operational or post-operational strategic communication. Cognitive warfare aims to manipulate adversary decision-making through psychological means, and lawfare uses legal procedures as a weapon of war, either exploiting or defending against legal constraints. Weaponized perception is different. It's not about spinning stories after the strike. It's about the story of preventing the strike. Commanders now operate under what I call and refer to as perceptual alibi. The perceptual alibi doctrine, which means that you document your restraint before you fire, you prove your compliance before you engage. And that brings me to the preconditions of the DRM. And the first is high virality potential. We need events that have emotional valence and visual impact. Civilians, casualties, damaged hospitals, destroyed infrastructure, these are inherently viral. The second one is media saturation. Pervasive, uncensored digital infrastructure in combat zone. Everyone has a smartphone, everyone can broadcast, and therefore it allows for that virality to actually take place. It allows for the amplification of the kinetic events. And third, and critically, the presence of polar actors. I refer to them as polar actors. At least one high friction actor committed to accountability, facing a low friction adversary operating with minimal constraints. When these three conditions align, the DRM explanatory power is strongest, and that's basically the catalyst for the cascading framework, for the link between the chain of events. By the time the evidence arrives, the political damage is done. Sanctions are imposed, alliances strained, demonstrations are taking place, and this is what the social media amplification, the race of the viral, is looking for. And I would actually say that this is even not even a bug in the system. It's an embedded and unavoidable feature of how things work on the battlefield. And this verification gap has become a strategic weapon, and it fundamentally changes how commanders make decisions. The different regulatory framework on the battlefield is based on those two main players, the high friction actor and the low friction adversary. And where the high friction actor, as I said before, is bound by law and accountability and is based on the fact that they have to double check, they have to verify, they have to ensure that every argument they say and every action they are taking is accurate and legally based, which means they care about their reputation. Where the low friction adversaries, authoritarian regimes, and proxies, for example, don't really care about their reputation. They care more about causing the viral damage to the adversary, and therefore their ability to operate is much faster. And then again, that verification gap is what we are looking at. Now, to look at this visualization of the situation, we have the kinetic event. Immediately after that, shortly after, within minutes, we have the low friction actors claim that goes viral. It's deployed globally, it's emotional, visual, and unverified, but it's instant. The high friction evidence could take hours, could take days, could take weeks, sometimes months, because it requires legal review, it requires intelligence vetting, operational security clearance, multi-source coordination, etc. By the time the evidence arrives, the political damage is, of course, done. And that is the verification gap being weaponized. And it changes how commanders make decisions on the battlefield. The DRM manifests through three distinct behavioral modalities, three ways actors adopt their conduct to optimize for digital legitimacy. Modality one is the evidentiary precaution, where high friction actors adopt costly enhanced measures to create perceptual alibi. Modality two, the second modality, is low friction claims, where low friction adversaries deploy instant viral claims to achieve perception override before verification is possible. And the third modality is information flooding, where actors deploy a deluge of contradictory narratives to cause factual paralysis, making truth unknowable. Notice the asymmetry. High friction actors are constrained by compliance burden. Low friction adversary operate with impunity. I'll try to demonstrate each of these modalities with examples from recent conflicts. With regard to the first modality, the evidentiary precaution, um, the goal is not just compliance. It's proving compliance. It's showing compliance. It's ensuring that you have good reputation, ensuring that you are following the law. The perception alibis means operational necessity is now judged by your ability to document and defend the action digitally. Look at the practices this produces. Adoption of an IHL plus standard, going beyond what the law requires. Systematic use of sensor logs, body cameras, drone footage, not just for after action review, but as primary evidence for digital defense. Multi-layered warning protocols using text, calls, loudspeaker, leaflets, all meticulously logged. We can take the Israeli operations in Gaza as an example. The systematic use of roof knocking, for example, or a multi-stage warning, the deliberate creation of auditable trail. This isn't just about protecting civilians, though that's definitely the legal duty. It's also about generating a defensible visual evidentiary record before you strike, because you know that the low friction counter narrative is coming within minutes. In fact, some might argue that the visual effect is even stronger than the precautionary effect. This evidentiary precaution in action. This is the ring in the chain of events. The IHL plus creates a paradox in this situation. The DRM compels commanders to adhere to IHL plus standards, rules of engagement more restrictive than international law demands. Now, here's the contradiction. A military legitimate target, one that is legally proportionate under IHL, may be foregone entirely, not because attacking it would be illegal, but because the strategic political cost of the inevitable viral narrative is deemed too high. Think about what it means. You have a legal strike, but you don't take it because you can't survive the digital blowback. This might lead you to choose a different target that might cause more collateral damage, but still proportionate and legal. But from a weaponized perception perspective, it's a better target. This transforms IHL compliance from a legal duty into a form of strategic calculation, even strategic self-sabotage sometimes. It may improve protection in the immediate term, but it also perpetuates the conflict or force you to engage that target later under worse conditions. This raises a critical legal question. Is visualization become a legal requirement? Article 57 of Additional Protocol 1 requires feasible precautions to minimize civilian harm. The DRM demonstrates that legal requirements of feasibility is becoming functionally dependent on visual defensibility. If you take a precaution that you cannot demonstrably prove it, if you lack the evidentiary precaution, you will suffer severe political penalty that restrict your future military freedom of action, even though you weren't acting against the law. This means that documentation burden is becoming a de facto component of what counts as a physical precaution, a sort of lex operandi, operational practice that functions as law, even if it's not yet formally codified as lex lata and definitely not the lex ferenda. In the paper, I argue that this may represent an emerging norm driven entirely by the digital environment. Or in other words, fix or it didn't happen. The end state is an attribution failure. When investigators cannot definitely establish who did what, IHL becomes unenforceable. You cannot identify violations if you cannot establish facts through the digital fog. We saw um, we saw that as a problem. Now, let's take a look at the second modality, the low friction claims. The strategy here is instant narrative deployment. Low friction adversary exploit the evidentiary friction lag. They might weaponize protected sites, hospitals, schools, knowing that any response will create a viral incident, but they might also fabricate the visuals altogether using deepfake or simple fraud. The goal is perception override, establishing a legally damning narrative before verification is possible. The de facto goal is to push the domino stones in order to start the chain reaction. The case study I'm using here is the Al Ahli Hospital incident in Gaza in October 2023. A false narrative was deployed within minutes, claiming deliberate Israeli attack on the hospital. It achieved a viral impact on social media, causes strategic damage, the cancellation of high-level diplomatic summit, etc. All that before any verification occurred less than 24 hours after the event. When high-friction evidence eventually arrived, proving that the explosion was caused by a failed rocket, the political damage was already done, and the diplomatic summit, for example, was already canceled. This is a verification gap weaponized. Speed is used to defeat accuracy and due process. Emotion defeat evidence. The third modality is the most insidious, information flooding. The strategy here is not to assert superior truth, it's to systematically destroy the factual common ground necessary for legal adjudication. This involved digital flood, contradictory claims released simultaneously, deepfakes, repressed archival footage, mutually exclusive damage reports. The goal is to make objective truth unknowable. And when we can't identify the truth, the outcome, the immediate outcome is basically legal impunity. IHL cannot be enforced and no real investigation can take place, especially at the early stages. And the best demonstration, the best example I found for that in my paper is the early stages of the conflict in Ukraine. The sheer volume of bipolar narratives made rapid third-party verification impossible for many incidents. A kinetic event took place on the ground, and immediately different publications surfaced. The strategic success wasn't proven innocence, it was creating delay and doubt. And that delay creates impunity gap. Sorry. So here's the core paradox of the digital battlefield, the double-edged sword. The positive edge, the DRM pushes high friction actors towards higher ex ante compliance and diligence. Real-time digital exposure creates powerful incentives to minimize civilian harm and document restraints. This is genuinely good for immediate protection. But the negative edge, the same system enables low friction adversary to achieve systematic impunity via factual paralysis and cause extra burden on high friction actors. By the time facts are verified, the political moment has passed. This is what I call the crisis of verifiability. The digital environment may improve the immediate conduct of war, but it fundamentally undermines the factual foundation necessary for post-conflict justice and the rule of law. The law still exists, but its enforcement mechanism is breaking down. So what do we do? The DRM provides theoretical tools for doctrinal intervention, and the paper argues for three research priorities. First, quantify the asymmetry. We need empirical studies measuring the cost of evidentiary precaution versus the zero friction advantage. What does this compliance burden actually cost high friction actors? Second, operationalize the DRM. Test the model's predictive power in command level decision making. Can we demonstrate reputational risk shapes targeting decisions? And the third one, we need to understand how IHL implementation is de facto affected by the DRM. So, what's next? If we're looking forward, the paper can be the beginning of a broader research agenda. First, empirical validation, of course. DRM makes possible predictions. We can quantify different compliance costs. We can measure resource burden. We can test whether high friction actors actually modify targeting decisions based on reputational risk. Second, structural research. This paper uses IHL as a case study, but the phenomenon is broader. How does social media structural logic affect other aspects of the rule of law? We need to move from a risk model to a full strategic paradigm. The digital battlefield is not going away, it's here to stay. The race to the viral will only accelerate. If we want the rule of law to remain effective, we need to understand these dynamics now and build institutional responses that preserve both the protection and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ido. This was fascinating, and the floor is open for questions and comments. So let me begin. Um, so one of the main arguments here is that if I put it in a simplified way, that technology enhances the compliance of IHL among democracies and doesn't change or decreases the compliance among proxies and terror organizations. I'm not sure if this is supported by the reality that we are seeing. The conduct of Israel in the Gaza war is probably prima facie the most least compliance with IHL compared to its conduct in previous rounds. And according to your theory, it should have been the opposite. So how do you explain this? And if I did misjudgment to the simplification of the one of your main arguments, correct me, please.
Yeah, I don't think you misjudged the oversimplified it. I think that there's a question of how the high friction actor Israeli actually is. And that's the question. If Israel is not to be considered strongly high friction actor, then the level of its compliance with IHL might not be as high as one imagine. And I think, at least in my paper, I try to use it. There's a question of how we identify high friction actors. And I think that one of the ways to identify high friction actors is use the rule of law index, for example, in which Israel is currently not placed very high, for example. And you have this kind of indexes that serve as an external measurement to identify whether or not we're talking about high friction actors and where on the spectrum they are actually high friction actors. But there's also the different way, the second way to look at high friction actors, and that's not necessarily how much they follow uh, international humanitarian law and how how they ranked currently on the rule of law index, but rather how much they care about their reputation and want to be considered high on those scales, want to be considered high friction actor. So you use those same modalities to improve your reputation in the during the conflict and in the international arena. So you use the precaution, the perception alibi, and you use social media measures in order to improve and work on your reputation and to ensure that you are considered a legitimate actor. So if we take Ukraine, for example, I think that I've used that example before. At the beginning of the Ukrainian Russia conflict, Ukraine's reputation about corruption and rule of law was awful. And they've worked hard, especially through these kind of measures, trying to improve their reputation. So they worked on reduce corruption, but they also worked on their reputation and then ensuring the perception alibi, etc., in order to improve their reputation within that battlefield, within the popular battlefield, in a way.
Adi.
Thank you. This is really interesting. I have a question though. From what I understand, the only reason, or maybe one of many, but from what you pointed out, the only reason why this is a negative thing as opposed to a positive, because I can think that in a world in which we barely comply with IHL, IHL plus compliance would be a good thing. But you're saying it's a bad thing insofar that wait, am I stuck again?
No,
No,
no.
no, I can hear you.
No? Okay, because you got stuck. In the only reason why it might be a bad thing is because we actually don't attack better targets, and more so than that, we attack them later on with more damage or so if you could explain a little bit more
Yeah.
this part. First of all, what is it based upon? Do you have like empirical research to show that that is the fact? Because otherwise I would think that the entire theory, because I think that IHL plus is a better thing. I don't see why it's a bad thing that we should care about, public perception. I think it's a good thing that the public can constrain in some shape or form, unless it does distort completely and end up with more damage. But I thought that what happened with the hospital was actually a cautionary moment for Israel to know that it is watched. Um, it showed that it didn't really care, but that's another. I mean, it cared insofar that it proved otherwise, but so yeah, if you could say a little bit more about the negative implications and then what is it based on? Thank you.
Yeah. So IHL plus is good, is a good thing, right? IHL brace us with the minimal threshold that states must not act under, and any act that will bring us higher is a good thing. But if we care more about the perception, then we are entering into a problematic place. And the best example is the Israeli use of leaflets and warnings and roof knocking, etc. Because it's amazing. It looks great on social media. It looks great on television,
Oh,
etc.
does it? Does it? I mean,
The,
everyone can see through
the
it and people
leaflets,
are criticizing it
leaflet.
and no one's buying it. In fact, they're saying that it's not a real warning.
That's my point. That's exactly my point. That it looks great. You have immediate footage of how you you gave the warning, you have the taxes, you have the leaflets, you've dropped as the IDF, but if it only looks good, but it's not actually an effective advance warning, then you are focused on how the perception of things and not actually doing what you're supposed to do. So the IHL plus, everything that will bring you above the requirements and will save people is good. And I'm saying that this is the positive edge of the sword. This is the good thing. This is the good outcome of pushing the high friction actors to higher standards. But if instead the perception of alibi is focused more about the appearance than the essence, this is where we are getting into a problematic outcome.
Bettina.
Hi, thank you so much, Ido. Very interesting presentation. I have a question regarding role of social media companies. I mean, everything that you actually recounted about what the different parties do, it happens through social media and is enabled by these companies. Do you see a particular role for these companies in the whole issue, or maybe also in the solution? Like when we think about content moderation or things like that.
Yeah, that's an amazing question, because the black box of the algorithm is always there. And if the TikTok algorithm, for example, favors Russia over Ukraine or favors Palestinians over Israelis or favors Iran over the US or whatever, then clearly this would also be a tool. And I think that in the process to demystify the DRM, the role of social media companies could be relevant, but there's a question of how much can someone rely on that? That's a great question of how much can we actually control that kind of algorithm. And I think that this is kind of the bigger problem, but I would say that if or when on how we can reduce the impact of social media, or at least regulate how social media address the conflict footage, this will allow us to reduce the low friction actors' attempt to misuse the data and misuse the footage from the battlefield. I don't think that even if we reduce that, it will catch up with the slow process of verification, but it will reduce the gap for sure. Yeah.
Fadi.
So I'm kind of inclined to agree with Adi a little bit. It would be really helpful. I mean, once the paper is in a stage that allows, readership to actually substantiate empirically the harm, because as of now, it's very, very theoretical. The trade-off that you're talking about, that's where the crux of the matter, and the argument is gonna kind of be. But I'll put this to the side for now, because IHL plus, I'm an advocate, So my question is actually about the framework. Can you just say more about the cascading dimension of this, and how, because I saw the sequence you have, and so given our conversations in the past about the distinction between cascading effects and cascading disasters, how they branch out, where do you see this kind of fitting in? If you have any thoughts.
Yeah, this is what I've been thinking about I think in the last weeks, how to identify that model within the cascading discussion. And I think that there's kind of a circular aspect here where we have the operation on the battlefield, which is being amplified through the social media, which affects the potential or later rule of law impunity, but it also affects how sides operate on the battlefield. And if it affects the way sides operate on the battlefield, it goes back to the influence on the kinetic event. So there's kind of circular chain of events here. On the one hand, on the notion of kinetic event, social media, strategic decision making, and the next kinetic event. That's one aspect, and the other one is the ex post legal analysis of the situation and the entire ability to investigate the situation and bring justice to any violation that took place during the conflict, then we have a more linear situation of a regular chain of events which one aspect leads to the other and the third. So I would say that we have two parallel situations of cascading process taking place at the same time.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you, Ido, for this really interesting paper. We talked about it in the first time on the first time you presented it. I myself also inclined to agree with Fadi and Adi on the trade-offs between the why it's good the good implications of the DRM and it's actually the bad one it's downsides. But I wonder about the scope of this theoretical framework. Is it just like wars, or can you apply it to what happens in the West Bank, for example, which is kind of like a conflict zone, but there you see a totally different dynamic of a race to the viral, where I don't know what's the official response of the Israeli government, but it's not. I mean, I don't think the government tried to justify what happens in the West Bank. On the contrary, it's just more radical responses. And also you see like the kind of dual contrasting responses from the opposition, which is like the central left-wing parties and the government parties. Yeah, that's it, I think.
Okay. Well, first, with regard to the West Bank, I think it goes back to Ellie's questions about Israel. In the Gaza, it goes on the same line. I think in the West Bank, um, I don't think Israel is a high fiction actor necessarily within its actions in the West Bank, especially today, especially under the current framework. We might have been. I'm not sure that currently Israel could be the Israeli government. Let's take a step back from self-identification of this action. I don't say we, but the Israeli government, under the current framework, definitely, I don't think is necessarily a high friction actor. With regard to the applicability of the model, I think that this model has the ability to be much wider than just conflicts. I think that in the previous time that I presented, Michael, I think, talked a little bit about COVID. And if I remember correctly, the use of social media during COVID with regard to medical aspects and the COVID crisis that we've had. You can take it, I think, to every extreme condition in which social media is a factor. And then in any case that social media is a factor and you have extreme conditions, it can have, I'm not sure that necessarily, but it can have an impact on the way the actors behave before and during, and how the rule of law is influenced or impacted in the ex post situation. So I don't think it's limited to conflict, and especially not to the one or two specific examples within conflict.
So, Ido, following your answer, let me ask, who is a high friction adversary, or do you have an example of a war or a conflict in which technology actually affected positively on IHH compliance?
I think that technology always has a positive effect. I think that I gave the text messages and etc. as an example that could be for the worst, but it's also as a positive measure. The use of more, if you have the choice to choose the more accurate weapon instead of how do you call them? An aerial weapon like that covers an area like cluster bombs, which we are currently way too familiar with them. But if you're forced to use accurate weapons rather than cluster munition, then this is a positive outcome. And the fact that we've seen that the IDF has reduced the use of cluster munitions since the Second Lebanon War to current warfare is a direct outcome of social media impact following the Second Lebanon War on today's warfare. I think we have several incidents of the US operating in Afghanistan where social media has affected them to care more about their actions because social media has affected the way they operated in the situation. And we also have situations where I'll stop here with that. In my paper, I refer to a couple of specific examples, but generally, there are several measures that can relate to the US, the UK, and Australia, for example, where IHL plus measures have been used.
It will be a fascinating empirical study to examine the relations between the degree of the rule of law, the democratic level in various periods of a country, and its degree of compliance with IHL, but it will be very difficult methodologically to construct such I think, a research. Nadiv, you were raising your hand.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was in the middle of taking this guy to basketball practice. I think two things. First of all, I'm in a rejoinder. It was extremely interesting and very theoretical presentation. So there's issue of real world, which I'm not always interested in, but I'm fully in a rejoinder to all of the comments that were about IHL plus is better. But having said that and put that aside, I kind of agree with Ido that we can think about this project also in some manner regarding the cascading paradigm that we're dealing with. And I think that in a high level of abstraction, what Ido is doing regarding the IHL is somewhat similar to other works that are related to legitimation management in situation of crises. And I think that this issue of how a decision maker is calculating its levels of legitimation, in this case, um, due to exogenic media and social communication exposure, is something that is not relevant only to wars. It's obviously relevant to other disasters. And I think that if we jump in and include within this idea the fact that we know about compound and cascades events. So as Ido says, it's kind of a circle that I think that people are writing about it, but a circle of legitimation management. But I think what Ido is adding to the table is about the verification gap, which I like, and I think that it is a significant contribution in two ways, I would have said. The first one is trying to conceptualize how the difference between strong and weak players could create a verification gap that is limiting or decreasing the more committed player, the more rule of law committed player towards compliance. So I think this is important. But more importantly, uh, I think that now going back to IHL, I think that Ido's example is relevant if we can imagine a situation which, in a recurring crises, a lot of verification gaps will eventually uh, uh, take the most the strongest player to change its strategy from a strategy of compliance to a strategy of all hell break loose. And I think that we can see that in the different examples that we were talking about in the IHL context. In my view, the Israeli case in the Gaza war is an example. And then it becomes more interesting because then once again, you talked about the fact that IHL plus is an advantage. It may be the case that if we are in a dynamic of escalation, so this is a downside. Thank you. I hope that I was understood enough, and thank you.
Thanks, Nadiv.
Adi.
So just a quick check, or question. The how do you say Akesh Bagag? Roof knocking in
Roof
English?
knocking, okay.
So this doctrine started in 2006, which is before the world of TikTok, not long after Facebook just started. I wonder if it's related to what you're talking about and if it's a good example, unless you have another reason to think that like virality is something that can be measured outside of social media. So that's maybe the first question. Like, are you talking specifically about social media world? Because if you do, then roof knocking is not necessarily a good example, which might explain why it's actually not perceived as good practice on social media world. And then the second question is, and maybe it's related to Nadiv's question just now, the high and low frequency, is that a given? Like, is that a DNA of a player, or can that shift according to how the world perceives that actor? So is that like because of the regime, they're high frequency or low frequency, or is that unrelated? And also, if you could say a little bit more about the meaning of friction, like friction with what exactly? Friction with the media, friction with, like, how did you come to this term? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. With regard to roof knocking, yeah, I don't think that the effect of virality is necessarily based on social media. I think that social media amplify that to insanity. I think that the world care about visualization even before that. And there's a research that I really like by Ami Ayalon, who's done at the Israeli Democracy Institute. I think he even presented that at some point in one of our young researchers workshop, in one of the first young researchers workshops. And he talked about how a conflict will continue until that one bad image will go on media. And that was back then was more about traditional media. So once BBC has that picture of that Sabra and Shatila or whatever, that one big image that will affect the warfare from that point on, it will end the conflict, or it will affect and modify the conflict. It will actually change how the conflict behaves from that point onwards. And I think that if that was true in 2013 about the image, it was even before that about different aspects on regular media. And I think that throughout the years, it becomes easier and stronger to have that impact through social media. So the element of visualization was there way before the internet, was way before social media. But social media definitely had an effect on the use of image fair or whatever, and to the point where the race to virality became an issue. So I don't think virality was an aspect 20 years ago, but visualization was definitely relevant 20 years ago, even further than that. But in current warfare, social media is definitely has an impact, is definitely an aspect, definitely an actor within the big picture of warfare. And with regard to high friction actor and low friction actor, there are several ways to define them. I think that for me currently within the theory, the use of the rule of law index is an easy way to identify, but the friction is versus the process and restrictions you are taking upon yourself in order to ensure that you are following the rule of law. And therefore, if you care and you have a process of verification, you have a process of investigation, you have a process of vetting everything you're putting out, then you have high friction. If you don't care, you just take a photo and put it on social media, then you are within low friction actors. Now, within the low friction actors, you don't necessarily talk only about the sides to the conflict. Low friction actors can also be individuals in the area of the battlefield who just take the photo and put it online. The fact that low friction actors within the conflict, your adversary is a low friction actor, means that they are doing that as a strategic choice. They are taking and they are making the conscious choice of manufacturing those outcomes, either real or fake, and to take advantage of those outcomes immediately through social media without any vetting, without any restrictions that will stop them. And therefore, they usually don't care so much about rule of law. They don't care about any restrictions. They don't have anything to stop them. And low friction actors can be non-state actors, and they can be also authoritarian players. Now, I'll add one more aspect. and this is the reputational aspect. So even if you are an authoritarian regime, but you still care about your international reputation, you might be shifted towards the high friction actors within the model because you care and you want to show the world that you care. And that will push you towards the positive side of caring about IHL, even going to the IHL plus. And this is, again, a positive outcome of the situation. Nadav?
So I have, maybe it's a peripheral question, but when you address reputation or perception, so I wonder the perception of whom and reputation in which community or political communities, and in connections to Fadi's presentation earlier today. So in a polarized world or fragmented world, so it's like the perception of the evangelistic factions in the United States, the perception of the American public in general, the Western European democracies, Russia, China, English-speaking countries, or, alas, international lawyers. And it's relevant to the argument because, I mean, sometimes it seems that the perception is the perception of international lawyers, or at least circles that adhere to international law. So that's my thought.
Yeah. So my tendency is to go within the perception within. Let me add the caveat for that. Due to my background, my perception is that the reputation is more in the international community and where the UN, NGOs, states that are ranked high among the rule of law states, this is where you're aiming to get your reputation cleared or approved or strength. And I think that we can also say that it might be relevant to states that have power in the region. So it depends on which region we are talking. We have to look at it from a real perspective. But if you care about the US perspective, then the US. But if you care about European perspective, then it would be European relevance. I don't have a precise answer to that question, but I think that if you're aiming toward to be considered law-abiding and working towards the high friction framework, then you would want the approval of the group that is ranked high on that direction. So on that group, on that index, on that framework, this will definitely be something that you're looking for. I don't have a complete answer to that. I need to think about it further.
Thank you, Ido. Are there any more questions or comments? Magda had to leave, but she wrote a comment, so copy it from the chat, Ido.
Yeah, I want to address what Magda said. I just looked at it.
Okay, so let Benny
Let
first.
Benny, yeah, sure.
And then Magda, and then we'll call it a day.
Sure.
Yes, thank you very much. Really interesting, and I've heard bits before. and I hope I'm not misrepresenting, but I mean, during the whole discussion, I was also thinking about what Ellie and others were all thinking about. Okay, so I mean, like you talking about 2 decades ago, I mean, I know it said so and so, but nowadays it seems like international actors don't really care about the IHL norms. But besides that, there's one major difference. Okay, I think between, let's say, I mean, I know periods and now is the technology has so much changed, and in the bad, in a way that also you can't really know what's accurate and what's not, what's not only fake news and alternative facts, but really, and you see that AI making useful images of what's going on, and I don't know. I just read an article that Iran posted an AI of Israel being bombarded and so on. And so, how can you make sense of all that? I mean, that's what you're trying to do, to make sense of all that. But it seems like it's incomprehensible. Like it's a big
So,
challenge.
so yeah, but that's one of the points of the model, to see how the rule of law can actually manage those developments, those occurrences where if we see a video, right? If we see a video of, you know, Russia attacking the moon. Let's go extreme, but Russia attacking the moon, because I'm sure that within 5 minutes we can have an AI video of Russia attacking the moon. And if we don't have some kind of ability to deal with the verification gap, everyone would jump at Russia. What the hell are you doing? Why are you destroying the moon? Where we do need a way, and then within 5 minutes we will hear that Putin should be put on trial because of crimes against the Martians or the moon people or whatever. And although I don't have any problems with putting people on trial, I think that not for those crimes, because they didn't commit those crimes. And we need to make sure that the legal systems, may it be the national systems, may it be the ICC legal framework or whatever, have the ability to deal with that verification gap, to deal with that information flooding, and to deal with all the data, real and fake, that comes from the battlefield in this case, in order to make sure that we don't unjustifiably go after the wrong people on the one hand, but we don't allow impunity on the other hand, because of all the alternative facts and the fake information and the inability to actually examine the situation. So that's the big question. How do we not only acknowledge the problem, but also make sure that through that model, we are starting to find ways to ensure that the rule of law is maintained despite the problems that technology creates and will continue to create against it.
Thanks, Ido. And was very interesting and controversial, and I'm sure that we'll go on talking about it, your thesis. And see you in our next seminar. And keep safe, everyone.
חג שמח.
רק שמח ושקט.
חג שמח.
Next time in person.
נקווה.